Hello and welcome to another podcast entry from the Relentless Watchman podcast. We've been away for a while, but we have returned and will hopefully be doing or entering more content on a more consistent basis. I hope that you are continuing to practice strategies to keep you safe during this holiday season. This is a very dangerous time for especially American citizens throughout the country, but especially those who live in a lot of your urban areas, your major cities. And I hope that you continue to learn and practice safe strategies and the operation of tools to continue to be safe throughout this upcoming new year. And also, don't forget that we post a lot of information on both Instagram at Watchman Security and on Facebook at Watchman Secures that can help you. Just some tools, some information, situations, news stories that you can read and learn more about how you can best keep yourself and your family safe. So keep that in mind as well. Today's podcast entry, I'd recommend that you listen to on your own. It is titled Policing Ain't for Everybody. And I will be talking about some of my personal experiences in law enforcement and how you have to truly be a settled person to basically be that hero that is coming to the assistance and aid of other people who are going through things. That is something that I recommend as well. If you haven't been through things to keep it general, it's hard to make that acclamation into that hero position. Some of the things that you see, and that's what we're going to talk about, some of the things that you see, if you aren't settled, they will definitely haunt you. And I've personally known those who were haunted by the things that they saw, and sad to say, they aren't here with us anymore. They decided to take measures, and I'm going to use different language before we get into it to make sure that you have a time to separate yourself from any children that you might have or any other listeners that you feel might be upset by the realism of the experiences that you have in law enforcement. So, I'm going to give you that opportunity to do that, and then we will get into this podcast. Okay, hopefully you're in a safe space to talk about what we have, or to listen to what we have to talk about on today. Now, the reason why I decided to do this podcast is because I attended a training session recently that was basically a refresher for a security team, and some of I guess it was actually the effect of being involved in a shooting, how it affects you down the line. And I gave some examples of people that I know that were involved in shootings where they actually took the life of another person. And these were people who did these actions criminally. Like, they were not in law enforcement when they did it. They were involved in criminal activity and took that person's life. One was actually committing a robbery when it happened. And in the interview with him, he stated, because I believe that he committed the time between the time that elapsed between the time that he committed the murder and when he was finally caught for the murder was at minimum, I believe, 8 to 9 months at minimum, and it could have been longer. This happened about 23 years ago, if not a little bit longer. It may have been 24 years ago, because I believe it could have occurred in 95, and he may have been incarcerated by the time 96 came, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, my memory on this particular incident is a little foggy, so bear with me. At any rate, this individual talked about how he would see that person's face in his dreams, how the fear in his eyes was something that he could not shake. And then I guess as he was dying from the gunshot wounds, because it was involving a gun, he kind of hesitated before he ran away, looking at him. And he said he couldn't shake that image. And I guess he lost a significant amount of weight, he would have to drink himself to sleep, etc. So I use that as an example to tell people that, even though your shooting is legit, it's something that you had to do in order to preserve your own life, there is a possibility that you might have to seek some type of counseling or what have you after it to assure that you're able to move forward after it's been occurred, after it has occurred. So it's not, for everybody. And I gave another example of a law enforcement officer who was involved in a shooting, who I worked with personally afterwards. And from my understanding, because it's been some years since I've saw him, probably, I'm thinking at minimum 6-7 years since I saw him, but he's retired and prospering. I mean, he was always laughing, joyful, cracking jokes, having a good time when I worked with him. He was a pleasure to work with after his shooting. Went on to have a great career and is thoroughly enjoying his retirement at the moment. So it affects people differently, but he came from an inner city environment, from a tough neighborhood where throughout the course of his life, he had to deal with situations. So when he came to law enforcement, he had the realistic view of the world. It was not like, everything is rosy and dandy. Not that's the view of the world that people have when they aren't from those type of areas. But when you have experienced it, when you've seen death, when you've had to deal with very, very bad people in the course of your growing up, then when you get into law enforcement, it's not a shock to your conscience when you're dealing with the same things. If you go throughout your life, and the closest that you come to these type of incidents and situations are watching the news reports on it, it's different than actually visually seeing it when having to deal with the individual that is the perpetrator of these crimes. And I will get into that soon. And having to maintain your composure when a majority of the country is expressing its hate against you. Remaining professional, and letting that stuff pretty much roll off your shoulders, having a positive outlet in order to deal with it, where you're not internalizing it and becoming abusive or hurtful to others. That takes a special type of individual. Now, one other thing that I mentioned during this meeting is that I feel that maybe it's definitely a single-digit % of the population are actually, I wouldn't say made, I would love to say made to be the police, but I would, I guess, say that they're the most appropriate to deal with those types of issues that you have to deal with as the police. It takes a special type of personality. It's because you have to be tough. You have to be tough, and it has to be part of your nature, not something that you're putting on an act to do. Because there's a lot of people that we meet and see, throughout the course of our lives who are self-considered tough guys. And toughness is not something that's innate. It's something that you build. And I'm talking about an inner toughness, like a resolve. It's something that you build through experience over a course of time. There's nobody who comes out of the womb kicking ass. That doesn't happen. Throughout the course of your life, dealing with different situations, and it's different from being hardened. It's similar to hardened, but at the same, it's different because you don't lose your compassion for people. You don't lose your love for people. You lose, you lose your fear of bad people, and you gain a deeper sense of responsibility for those who may not be able to stand up for themselves. More, specifically children in most circumstances. Everybody might think that they have that. Oh yeah, I'm qualified for that. I have all of those attributes, but it plays out differently in real life when you're dealing with those situations. In real life, I took a pause because for a moment I thought I wasn't recording. I'm like, oh my goodness, this would be terrible. but I've worked with hundreds of police officers. Well, I mean, thousands. I've been employed with one of the largest police departments in the entire country. And when I say one of the largest, I mean top 3, not, top 20, top, 30, top 3 departments in the entire United States of America. So I've worked with thousands, literally thousands of different officers over the course of my career. And I've seen them both on duty and off duty. And it truly takes a very special individual to do this work. And everybody is not cut out. When I was in the police academy, we had all types of individuals that had left other types of employment, including we had attorneys, we had engineers, people that had worked sales that were clocking 6 figures in sales, and then there was a downturn in the industry and they said, okay, I need something that both pays well and has good benefits. So they all flocked to law enforcement. Now they had the degrees, they had the customer service experience, the work history, what have you. All the things that people would believe that would contribute to a person being a good officer. What they were missing was being streetwise, having that empathy, that understanding through experience of knowing how to look beyond the circumstances that are on the surface to see what the root cause behind a lot of the issues that members of the communities that you're going to serve, that you would serve, are dealing with. So you can look at a situation and you can have something to relate to say that I kind of understand it, I get it. So even with empathy, people think that that's a feeling that you have, but it has to be based upon experiences. It has to be based upon something that you can reach out and to relay that understanding of that person's situation. This goes the longest way in dealing with whether or not you need to effect an arrest, because every situation, even when a person has committed a criminal act, isn't always one that would benefit from that person going to jail. And there are other ways. Thankfully, a lot of these reform-minded criminal justice members throughout the country are looking at restorative practices. Basically, instead of incarcerating them, because you can take a person who committed that theft because of hunger. You'll take a petty theft person, place them into a prison environment where they're with murderers and rapists, and that person is going to have to become a different person in order to survive that time in prison, and they're going to come out a different person when you restore them to the community. What restorative practices would do is, okay, I'm not going to put you in that position because I know how that would affect you. I think that there is something that we can do on the outside of prisons where we can kind of tweak your mentality and then restore you with what you need to be able to support yourself, where you won't have a reason to go back to criminal acts. And if you do decide that you want to return to criminal acts, then on that second time where you've gotten what you need now, we'll know that you're just a criminal, and then we can prosecute you likewise. Of course, still looking at your situation, but okay, we've done all of this for you. Now we know that you need to be in jail. To have that type of mentality, it takes experience. I'll look at Kim Foxx as an example out of Cook County, Illinois. Using her as an example, Kim Foxx was actually a victim of sexual abuse throughout her life. So she has something that she can reach back to and have a reference when she's dealing with others who have been victimized by criminal acts. Now, having these high prison populations with people who are what we used to call boosters, who steal from department stores, sweaters and stuff like that to resell it as their hustle because they have no experience, they have no, they really have no hope, but they have no means of making provisions for themselves. They've gone through a failing school system. They've lived in some of the worst communities where they were constant witnesses to violent acts, which causes its own depression, especially in children. So they've suffered through childhood traumas, and it's led them to this pathway on life. Let's interrupt that pathway, build this new road where they can go back right and help them and assist them to go forth on that new road and create a new life in themselves, become different people. Prior, we would throw all of these people in jails, pack these jails out, Now we have no place to put those criminals who have committed these violent felonies against human beings. And we have to initiate a process of placing them on home arrest, or we build the new prisons, further making the politicians and their friends who own these, especially in the private prison industry, richer. Having that full knowledge of how all of these things operate, including those individual lives in these depressed communities, you're able to make the best decisions on how to go about prosecuting people. You're able to initiate the reforms that are necessary to affect the change in the greater national communities. And it takes experience in dealing with certain things to be able to do these things in those positions as district attorneys and state's attorneys like Kim Foxx. She's been through something, basically. Personally, I always said that our police should come from the toughest communities. Now, when you're in a rural area, of course, let's say if you're in a town of 2,000-3,000 people, I don't think you should take a big city police officer and bring them down there to police those small towns. Those small towns need someone with that small town experience, that has that small town understanding. I believe that big cities likewise need people who grew up in those tough neighborhoods in those big cities, who were those people. They were the people who witnessed those violent acts. They witnessed those people in those communities preying upon the others in the community, or using those other people in those communities to push themselves forward, through drug sales or the like, and have that same understanding of those who were, because we have 15, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. I've seen them younger than that. I've seen them 9, 10, who were providing for their families through drug sales, who built drug organizations as preteens and ran them in order to make sure that themselves and their friends' families were fed, whose moms were strung out on dope and could not care for the family properly. So they went out and did what they needed to do in order to ensure the survival of their siblings, and to care for their mom, to make sure that they had rent paid and food in their homes, that their siblings got proper medical care when they were suffering from some sort of disease or illness or injury. This is the reality of a lot of our poor areas in the country that everyone does not understand. And you need a person with that type of understanding in order to make the best decisions for those people. This is not a decision everybody is qualified to make. I can honestly say that I know when a person needs to go to jail and when they don't, because I've dealt with people all my life who either needed to or didn't, but they all went. Well, all of the people that didn't need to go went. I witnessed that because you had people from other communities that did not have the understanding necessary to make that type of judgment. I could almost wrap it up now, but I have a few more things to say before I do. There was one particular instance, and this goes to how having that understanding of who's who in the neighborhoods, because you have the so-called bad guy who's actually the good guy who is just trying to get by. And that is somebody that you would want in your corner. So there's a way that communities work, whereby this person that would be, most likely regarded to as a bad guy, can actually work with you in order to affect the greatest amount of positive change in that same community. And you can even help that person transition into someone who can be a leader, who through you, and the information and the ability that you assist him in gathering or achieving, can have the effect that a law enforcement or the criminal justice system could never have. Because a lot of people don't understand that a lot of these men in these neighborhoods have genius level understanding, but it's based upon where their experience is. So their genius level understanding is of that particular community that they're in, and they understand how everything works and how everything has come together to make the community what it is. And it's what we would all consider undesirable. That can be the person that you can utilize in order to affect the greatest and, best amount of change. But if you have this perception that everyone there is an enemy, then you will not be able to see that. And that's getting into some of the basics. Like if you have a black community on the southwest side of, we'll say the south side of Chicago, it could be Atlanta, it could be the east side of Detroit, what have you. If your police come from that same community, who is better to understand that community than that officer who's actually born there and who has, a minimum of 18, 20 plus years of experience and knowing and understanding that neighborhood? Who's better to go back and deal with that younger person who is basically the younger version of himself and create a pathway for that young person to avoid all of those pitfalls that exist in these urban environments? There's nobody better than that person, especially when that person has been through something. Now, being that the title is "It's Not for Everybody," I'm going to speak on a couple of cases that I personally experienced that it changes. It definitely, it changed me. And every police officer that I've met and developed a personal relationship with has had a similar experience where there were certain cases that pretty much molded the way that their career was going to progress and end on, because some of them are retired. The particular case for me, and it kind of defined what I would do throughout my police career, was this probably happened my second or third month in the police academy. So you, depending on the city that you police in, they try to give you a purview of the way the entire department works together, and even with other departments as well. So you'll visit the ME's office, the county coroner's office, which is something I'll never forget. Like, I believe that even though it's going on 20 years, I would never forget the smell of that place. I'll never forget the smell of that place and the amount of bodies that were stacked up. It would almost remind you of the depiction of ships that were used to transport slaves throughout the different American and British colonies, depending on who owned, where they were going, what have you. or even back and forth throughout the United States as well. The way that the bodies were lined up in the ME / county coroner's office, and the smell, the putrid smell of death that existed throughout that entire place. And then the actual people who were dealing with the bodies and how casually they did it, like they were joking and laughing as they were cutting through a person's body. And I was like, wow. That's it. So it's something that I'd never forget. But, you take those trips. You go to the county jail to see how they do their intake and how their operation unfolds, because having that wide view will help you when you're processing your arrest, when you're doing a death investigation, etc. So this particular instance, I was detailed to the homicide, I would say the main homicide branch on the South Side that dealt with the most amount of homicides, I should say. And they gave me a case file it was court prep for a case that was dealing with, and I'm going by memory, something that is like 17 years old. There was a 2-year-old boy whose mother had met a guy out of the club. They started dating, and the mother began, I guess, to trust this man who, if I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking right around early 30s, possibly like 32. I believe about 32 years old at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So her trust extended to allowing him to care for the child in her absence, basically babysitting. On this one particular day, so the man had an apartment that he shared with another man. Neither one of them lived there. I guess the rent was very low, and they both went half on it, and they used the apartment to bed women who they would randomly meet wherever. I'm thinking, private events, clubs, what have you. So on this particular day, he took the boy up to that apartment with him. While at this apartment, on the investigation, the child had abuse to his rectum. The boy, while he was there, urinated in the bed, and the man took a cord of rope and tied it around his penis, like in a knot, to cut off his urination ability. The homicide occurred when I believe that he took the boy and slammed him against the wall. And there was, I believe, blunt trauma to the brain that may have caused it to swell. Could have been an aneurysm or something of that led to his death. On another occasion, there was I know it was an infant that was younger than a year old, but I think older than 6 months. I can't remember. We'll say possibly around 9 months of age as an average, somewhere in that area, that's 6 to 9 months area. the mother was concerned because the child had a cough, I think, was some chest congestion, what have you, that was lasting for a significant amount of time. And she took the child to the emergency room finally. While there, they conducted a throat culture of the child, found out that it wasn't a cold or flu or anything of that nature. The child actually had gonorrhea in the throat culture. Investigation ensued, which found out that the child was being kept during the day by a man who was a friend and may have lived with the mother of the child. This man was placing his penis in this child's mouth, and in his own words said that he was using it as a pacifier. These are the type of individuals that law enforcement have to deal with, not once or twice in their careers, but on a consistent basis. These are the people who are committing these acts. Both women, children, men, nobody should be hurt. But when it gets to babies, to infants, to toddlers, adolescents, to children, period, to women, any type of forcible acts upon them, what have you, it's a special type of anger that we normally have as people. And this is something that you might deal with depending on the urban area that you're in, because contrary to popular belief, the predators prey on those who have the smallest voices. And I'm not meaning smallest voice as, being a child's voice. I mean the ones that nobody listens to, which just happen to be your poorest people throughout the country, which happen to be a majority of your black communities throughout the country. Your poorest communities tend to be your black communities. Your predators hover around these communities, even coming from other areas to these communities to prey on these people. If you have not built something within yourself that enables you to deal with that situation correctly, either two things can happen. You can break down, you can internalize those type of situations, and it could cause you to go into a depressive state, which in turn, many times leads to either alcoholism, drug abuse, or suicide. On the other hand, you could have the opposite effect where you feel like vigilante justice is necessary, and you can develop a mentality whereas, whatever I can do to these scum and get away with it, I'm gonna do it. To develop that, to have, not just develop, because that's something that I believe that you might not be able to just develop. I've seen people develop it because I did act as a training officer for 8 years of my career. You can add probably 2 to that in my second career. I have seen people develop it, but they had to have the right instructors the right trainers to be able to give them the proper perspectives that you need in order to deal with these things professionally, to be able to move past them and to not allow them to pull you onto either side, either the depressive side or the vigilante mentality side. But to have that already, it takes a special individual, and that individual has some innate attributes as well as they have experience over the course of their lives that prepare them mentally and emotionally to deal with these things consistently. Imagine being cursed out on a daily basis, going into communities with the proper mentality that I am here to help to make this place better, and be called racist epithets, nigger, hunky, cracker, spook, etc. And, this is something that normally a person would react with violence toward. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things you're not getting in my face. You're not cussing me out. You're not, calling me all type of MFs without a consequence. But being in a professional capacity, you have to have the ability to be called those things and still function professionally in that position and still provide the service that is necessary, that police service that is necessary to bring that balance back to whatever situation that you're dealing with. An overwhelming majority of people are incapable of doing that. Overwhelming majority. Now, in this meeting that I spoke of earlier, this training I spoke of earlier, I said that maybe at best 10% of the population is capable of that. But I would say maybe 3 in my personal opinion. And I based that upon the folks that actually had the right mentality, the right amount of wisdom, the right amount of patience, the right amount of go get 'em within themselves, and the balance between all of those different attributes, that empathy, that love of people. I believe that you need to have an innate love of people in order to serve them properly. Some people hate people. It's a lot of people that hate people. You know what I mean? It's a lot of people that bring their own personal bias. There's a lot of women that hate men. There's a lot of men that hate women, and still have mommy issues from what they went through, the trauma that they experienced as children, and vice versa. They're incapable of separating that. Like, people have so many issues unresolved from situations that they've dealt with that they're incapable of separating those from the mission at hand in law enforcement. And I've seen them all. They've run the gamut of everything that you can think of in a negative sense. And then I've met people who I would believe would be perfect, but they are completely uninterested in the job, and there's no active recruiting in order to bring those type of people on board. Now, there's a misnomer in law enforcement that, and I guess not just now, because we can go back to 1920s. O.W. Wilson, who was a police reformer, as well as there was another individual that that he actually learned from as well. I think he could have been, that man could have been O.W. Wilson's police chief as well. But I know that he was a professor, and I believe that O.W. Wilson was a student of this man. But he spoke of college-educated police officers being more professional. And I tend to disagree because, for one, colleges are not the best environment for your ideal social interaction that's going to benefit you as the police. And then you have many colleges that are extremely segregated, and even the ones that have a semblance of integration, it's divided internally by cliques that are basically racially assigned. So you still have an issue, because I believe the best ones are made through experience, and you're not getting the experience necessary to be able to deal with people properly. Now you take that individual from those tough communities who have dealt with things throughout their life, and you place them in a college environment where they're able to intermingle with other people. You could take that person and place them anywhere throughout the United States, in any community, whether it's poor, disadvantaged, or what have you, and they are going to be a rock star in the police world. But you can't take that person from, middle America, place them in a college environment, and then place them in the Pittsburgh community of Atlanta, or the east side of Detroit, or the Inglewood community of Chicago, or, the 1970s, 80s Bronx. You know what I mean? They're not going to function properly because they don't have the understanding necessary to be the most effective in those communities. Now, can they develop it over the course of time? Yes, that is possible, but they would have to be paired with somebody that has that understanding. You can't pair them with somebody from that same middle America community and expect them to be effective in Inglewood or Pittsburgh or Thomasville in Atlanta. Pittsburgh and Atlanta, because I'm sure people are thinking Pennsylvania, but Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Thomasville, Atlanta, Adamsville, Atlanta, you're not going to be effective if you grew up in Podunk, Iowa, then went to Brigham Young University, and then are placed in those communities. Your education, it will be invalid. It will be an invalid resource for you to deal with the people in those communities. That person from those communities can get that same education and, blow people away, probably be the best advisors, and would probably, I would say more than likely, make your best chiefs of police, as well as any other position in criminal justice, including, district attorneys, judges, etc. And I believe that's the fundamental issue with the criminal justice system, that parity is missing, that balance is missing from it, because you have people who, in my opinion, are disqualified from properly judging communities that they have no experience in dealing with. Your only experience dealing with them is handing out time to its criminal offenders. You're not from there. You don't understand the culture, and how it operates and how it affects people. Then you can't efficiently judge those people from that community. And in order to get to that type of parity, we have to pull those individuals. There should be, and this should be part of the criminal justice reform. We should be identifying individuals from that community early on and setting them on a pathway to enter into the criminal justice system as judges, as attorneys, as law enforcement personnel. We should have a track starting in elementary school for them to follow up through, where they can gain that experience while there. They can gain that knowledge as well, and then we can funnel them straight up into that system where they can be the judges of those same people, of that same community. And we won't have that disconnect from folks who are in those positions currently and who have traditionally been in those positions, judging people that they really have no understanding of. Law enforcement is not for everybody. I'm hoping that there was a significant amount of information to assist in gaining an understanding of how it works, and basically the point of this broadcast, that law enforcement is not a position that can be undertaken by just any average Joe. There are some fundamental qualities that a person would need to have to be the most effective in doing so. It's not for the squeamish. You see a lot of things that you have to process and have to move on. Now, it can fuel your desire for justice, but it can't fuel your desire for vigilantism of course, we don't want it to fuel your desire to enter into a depressive state. And how effective will you be if you're in a depressive state when you're in a position where you need to come to the aid of other people? We covered a lot of ground in this podcast, but I'm going to bring it to an abrupt end. Like I said before, I hope that some understanding was gained by those who are not in law enforcement. I also hope through this venue that we can help the average person develop understanding of what law enforcement deals with, that will hopefully foster more respect of the industry and those are involved. Unfortunately, especially in the South, it's an industry that pays extremely poorly for what the individuals who have entered into it are responsible for. And that's something that needs to be addressed through our citizens in protest to our government officials. And it's something that they should consider when they're looking to vote and to elect these government officials. There's so much that needs to change. And that should be one of the most pressing issues that is brought to the table for discussion when choosing our leaders, our elected leaders. And also, one last thing I'd like to say before I end the broadcast is that we should all consider making our law enforcement leaders elected. Our police chiefs in our major cities, as well as most of our sheriffs, if I'm not mistaken, it could be all of them are elected. All of our law enforcement positions should be at the mandate of the people and not positions where you have mayors who are able to make that decision solely, which means that they will have that pressure that they can place on that law enforcement leader to do their bidding and their will. We need to take that power away from government officials and put it back in the people's hands and allow us to decide who our law enforcement leaders will be. Thank you once again for listening to the Relentless Watchman podcast. I hope this was informative. Please leave a message, a shout out, or if you have any grievances or issues, drop them in the comment section, and they will definitely be addressed, because this forum is for you, is to help all of us develop the understanding necessary to make our communities better. So thank you once again for listening. Don't forget, Watchman Secures on Facebook and Watchman Security on Instagram. And we look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Have a wonderful day, and make sure you keep yourselves and your loved ones safe. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye.